But I want to go to Rick Grenell, our Senior Advisor for Foreign Policy and National Security, because there's two big meetings occurring right now, Rick. One is the G7. That is occurring in Munich as we speak, and it's a lot of talk again about economics, but of course Ukraine as well.
Yeah, these are big issues that are on the plate for the G7. Obviously, the Ukrainians would like to see the G7 do a lot more. We clearly have seen the Germans talk about doing some more, but they haven't really. It's been shocking how little Europe has done, led by the Germans. They did this phony thing where they said, oh, we're going to put the Ukrainians into the application process to join the EU. And then the Germans quickly thereafter said, we would like to have more power on who becomes members of the EU, and therefore they will shut it down. So they're playing a little games. They're never going to let the Ukrainians into the EU, but they've announced that they get to at least fill out an application.
Rick, on the Ukraine situation with regard to Russia and the conflict, we talked before we went on with our military analyst, Colonel Wes Smith, and Wes said that, you know, Ukraine is suffering some real damage right now. I mean, there were more attacks in Kyiv, which have been pretty quiet for the last 4 months. How do you see that right now, that whole situation?
You know, Vladimir Putin is watching exactly what we're watching, with the Americans getting distracted with an abortion debate and a ruling. And I think that there's no question that the Russians and Putin will amp up, will go on the offense when they think that the West is distracted. You've got a G7 meeting. Clearly the Germans have sent a very loud message that they're not going to provide immediate weaponry to the Ukrainians. They're talking about doing it at the end of the summer. They're talking about delivering tanks that they really, the Ukrainians didn't request. So they see the distractions from the United States and from Germany and the rest of the West, and I think he's doubling down and going on the offense.
And then, you know, after the G7, we move into NATO, the NATO summit in Spain. And I know you talked already about this idea of playing, like, will Ukraine become part of NATO? Will it not become part of NATO? But honestly, what I'm hearing, Rick, which I think is something, too, that the United States and the American audience is hearing when we do cover this issue, is that it's months and months and months in advance now. It's like, well, in 2 months, this will happen, and maybe 6 months, and like a never-ending war is basically what I'm getting to. It sounds like we're at least on a path for many more months of bloodshed.
No one is better at bureaucracy and slowing down the process than the Europeans. They love to talk about this, and that's one of the frustrations I think that many Americans and others are having, is that there's a lot of talk, but there's not a lot of action. When it comes to NATO, you know, I'll just reiterate it again. I just don't think that members of NATO who aren't paying their 2%, aren't paying the obligations that they signed up for, those members should not be voting on expanding the membership of NATO. Why are they getting to a vote to expand the responsibilities of the defense shield when they're not paying the current requirements and the current obligations that they have? Until every member of NATO is paid up and doing their fair share, I just don't think that we should be talking about expanding the alliance.
The other thing I wanted to move to, Rick, is the situation with Iran. And there was talk over the weekend that the administration wants to get back into this dialogue with the Iranians. The Russians have, I think, been kind of putting a little bit of a kink in their wheel there so that the Biden administration hasn't been able to move forward. But it seems like that President Biden and his team are committed to this idea of a deal with Iran, which is absurd to me, but it seems like where it's going.
Look, Foreign Minister Lavrov was just in Tehran. I think this is a sign that they're pressuring the Iranians to move forward with the blessing of the Russians. They're going to try to jam the Americans once again while the Americans are distracted. Look, the Russians, as you know, Jay, they want some help in Syria. They want to get out. They are fully responsible, but they want to dial back. They clearly are feeling overextended between Ukraine and Syria. And so they're trying to get another country to take over their responsibility, their role in Syria. They'd like the Iranians to do it. Obviously, That's not what the Israelis or the Americans want. And I hope that the Biden team is laser focused on making sure that no one takes advantage of us while we're being distracted at a high political level.
You know, Rick, you just texted me, but there was a lot of talk, and I think you can answer it because people are wondering why President Biden's ambassador to Germany was not there when he arrived, and people are speculating all of this. You've done some work on this to be able to answer that question.
Yeah, unfortunately, the U.S. ambassador to Germany has tested positive for COVID, and she wasn't able to join the president. I know she's got to be greatly disappointed that the president of the United States comes to Germany. She's not able to be there. It's kind of one of those shining moments. And a lot of work gets done between the Germans and the Americans if you have an ambassador that's kind of driving things forward. So she was not able to be there, and our hearts go out, and I hope that she's going to be okay.
So, Rick, I wanted to ask you, I want to follow up on a portion of that, and that is you served as the U.S. ambassador to Germany. Germany is the most powerful economy in Europe. And give us a sense of what it was like dealing with your counterparts and the chancellor. What was your sense of that? I think it'd be very important for our audience to understand the nature of what goes on.
First of all, on a personal level, I loved Chancellor Merkel. She was very friendly, very nice, has a great sense of humor, and we could talk pretty openly and casually, and I enjoyed that. But there's no question that the Germans, I believe, and I articulated this very clearly, moved away from the Western alliance over the last 15 or 20 years. They want an alliance without it being Western facing. They want to sell cars in all the capitals. They want to be everybody's friend. They want to be Switzerland when it comes to foreign policy. And one of the things that I tried to push, and President Trump tried to push, is to say, you don't get to do that. You're Germany. Americans have made lots of sacrifices for Germany, and we expect the Germans to be Western facing, not some of the problem countries in Europe. And so that relationship, I think, was always trying to be one of reminding the Germans that they have responsibilities to the West. And, sometimes we had members of the German cabinet that were really supportive, that encouraged me to be stronger and more potent. And then other times they would say, no, we want to just be Europe, and we're done with this kind of Western alliance of picking fights. I think the war in Ukraine has changed them. I think that there's a flipping of the policies, and they realize that they have to be more Western. They haven't quite said Donald Trump was right, but I hear it.
A political question for you, Rick, to finish up today, and that is the Democrats seem to be seizing on the Roe versus Wade being overturned as like their saving grace for the midterm elections. I have my own thoughts on that, but your kind of reaction to that will somehow people will ignore inflation, this foreign kind of insecurity for Roe versus Wade.
Well, first of all, I don't think anyone's going to ignore inflation or gas prices. But to the extent that the Democrats want to make abortion the issue, Republicans have an opportunity to make abortion the issue and show the world that the Democrats are radical. You look at other countries around the world, and nobody wants late-term abortions. It's very unpopular. Governor Newsom here in California is making a move to enshrine it into the California Constitution. I've made it clear if he tries to do that, we will fight him hard, because I don't believe pro-choice Californians want to see late-term abortions. Let's have that debate. And I think that they lose this when we are able to talk about the issues and what they're trying to put forward. Let's be very clear with what they're trying to do.
Rick, as always, we appreciate it, both the international insight, the foreign policy insight, and the political insight, as always.